Well, hello. It is my pleasure to welcome you to a brand new study. You may have been with me for previous studies and other books, but today we get to embark on a brand new one. And maybe this is one you're going to be less familiar with. In fact, I would imagine this is probably one of the least discussed, least preached about books in the Bible, yet it is so important. And there might be a variety of reasons why people would shy away from it. And I'll even ask you here at the beginning to think about your own knowledge, even as you maybe even try to pronounce this very difficult word of Ecclesiastes. Who wrote it? What was it written for? What do we learn from it? Is it a narrative? Is it a New Testament or Old Testament book? Who's the author? What can we learn from it? We're going to get into all those aspects today. But it's ultimately a book of wisdom. So let me set a little context here. I think it's no secret. I don't think I'm telling you anything new, that a lot is happening in the world. And maybe a lot's happening in your individual life. So we are on the verge of an election, a very divided election. Almost all the polls show that it's a very close race. I'm certainly not going to weigh in on that today, but we are a divided people. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot at stake. There are many wars happening in different parts. We've had an ongoing war with Russia and Ukraine. We've had the battle happening with the Middle East, which has really been going on for so long. There's so many worries about the economy and inflation and budget deficits and just so many things. And just what about even the anxiety we might have in the world and how it's changing, and AI and, just so many things are happening, not to even mention our individual lives and the decisions we have to face. Well, generally speaking, as I came to think about a new study, I really was thinking with all this happening that wisdom is needed. And I wanted to go to one of the books of wisdom. And Ecclesiastes is one of those books. It would be called a wisdom book. And let's dig a little deeper into this book. So first of all, who wrote it? And of course, all scripture is written by God. He speaks through humans, but the human he spoke through is Solomon. And I'm convinced it's Solomon. There's very little. There's a handful of people that might say differently, but I think everything about it, and we'll get into that even as we begin to look at the verses, is Solomon. He's the son of David, and he's a king in Jerusalem, and that's identified in the very first verse, which we'll unpack here in just a few minutes. And it's also through other parts of the book. As various parts, when somebody writes something, there are things about it that identifies them as the author. He was not just, first when we limit it to the sons and then a king, that's already a very, very, very small group of people. But then also talking about one who had a prosperous kingdom and was wise. But the author himself, that is Solomon, even shares in the midst of the writing that this is authored by the one true shepherd, and we know that is God. What's interesting, so interesting, and I know you've been with me at any length of time, you've heard me mention this, it's just something that strikes me constantly. This was written 3,000 years ago, 10th century BC. But the words hold up so timelessly, so amazingly, written by a Middle Eastern king 3,000 years ago, but so full of wisdom for our world today. You might be wondering about this unusual word. It's hard to spell. It can be hard to say. First of all, Ecclesiastes is referring to an assembly and one who addresses the assembly. He calls himself the preacher, one who speaks to the congregation. And he's giving here thoughts on life, of course, from God and from his own perspective as the one who's lived it completely. There's the wisdom also of experience. You go and speak to someone that maybe has gone somewhere you've never gone, you want to learn from them. Or somebody who has an experience in a field, and you learn from them. You learn from the actual experience that they have had in their life. And certainly Solomon has lived these things out. Some of the themes that emerge. And I will warn you, this is not a light book. It's a book of wisdom. It has deep thoughts in it. Some can be challenging. So I wanted you to be aware of that. There's parts of it that could even be, if we're not careful, that could sound depressing sometimes to get to wisdom and to learn. You have to deal with some hard parts. There's some tragedy. There's some of the fall of life. He talks a lot about the vanities of life, sin, death, work. But he also talks about the enjoyment of life and God's gifts, the fear of God, wisdom. He uses the phrase a lot, under the sun, 30 times. And really, what he's saying in this book from so long ago is there's nothing new under the sun. And you might say, well, there's so many things that have changed. Yes, there are temporal things that have changed, but there are eternal things that remain. And so this was a book written for them as it is written and has been preserved for us to learn from today. So I'm going to take a little time and begin to study it. So starting in 1, we're just going to kind of get about halfway through this first chapter today. We get the identification of the author, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now the word preacher is one who inculcates or exhorts something earnestly. That's, I desire in sharing these messages to try to teach, or if you will, preach, to try to, I am very earnest in my study. I'm not perfect, but I have a desire to try to learn and for others to learn from it. That's what he's saying here. That's his desire, is to share to the assembly and to share with us today the things he's learned. And it says it's the son of David. Now, if you want to go, I don't want to take all the time to go through the entire chronology here, but you can find the chronology of all the sons of David, all the children of David. He also had a daughter, Tamar, but that's in 1 Chronicles 3, verses 1 through 9, if you'd like to see that. Now, specifically, in terms of king, it says in 2 Chronicles 1:1, Solomon, the son of David, established himself in his kingdom, and the Lord his God was with him and made him exceedingly great. And one thing that will definitely in future verses come out is that the author here had a kingship that was great and mighty and prosperous and wealthy and rich, and God had given him much wisdom. And we see in 1 Kings 4:29, God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and the wisdom of Egypt. 1 Kings 4:34, and the people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. I tell you what, if you could have the ability to wish for something, you could wish for riches, but those riches can be lost. But wisdom will stay with you. And something I was thinking about, all these people, even the kings, everybody in all the nations wanted to hear his wisdom. It's encapsulated in this book. that we're going to study. So the people sought him for the wisdom. We should seek people with wisdom in our lives. And this is a book that can have much to teach us. Going on and looking at this next section, I'm going to start off by reading it and then share some thoughts on it. And we'll see some of these early themes emerging, which will be discussed later. So this is vanity of vanities, constant phrase, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes, and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south. It goes around to the north. And around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been in the ages before us. Again, that written about 3,000 years ago. So we're just going to dip our toes in the water a little here. We've established the rationale for the book, the background of the book, the author of the book. But let's think a little about some of these themes. We're going to see this phrase almost every chapter of the book. I believe there's 12 chapters. Vanity, vanity of vanities. A Hebrew word is hebel. It's talking about something that's a vapor or temporary. So there's a lot here about examining our life and how much time, how much effort, how much toil, how much anxiety and worry do we spend on these things that are so very temporary. How much of life is really a vanity? And we think, we get in agony, or we wrestle with, or we spend just countless hours. And it's something that's going to be very fleeting. In fact, then it goes on to the next question, which will come up again too. Some of these questions are going to be repetitious. What does a man gain? It's a question for contemplation. And it's repeated in many of the chapters. Again, for this time, effort, toil. What are you gaining? What are you achieving? And we always think that things are, different in our generation. And think about your own lifetime. And I'm sure as you listen to this, there's people of a variety of ages. And I think about my own. And I think about how much has changed since I've been born. There's no real internet. There might have been the remnants of a very early internet. There really weren't cell phones. This idea of AI, all these things are changing. And yeah, much is happening. But we're going to take a second here and think about the things which are eternal. The things that are the same since the time of Solomon, the natural world itself. He says, under the sun. And we have the elements of the sun every day. We get up and the sun emerges. There's the wind. We're now in a season of change of weather, from the summer to the fall, and sometimes we see that. We even see in our world today how the weather can be, and the winds, and the rain, and the seas. So I invite you, just as these early thoughts, we're going to think about a book that's the opposite of the temporary issues of day-to-day life. It's about the things that really matter. And Solomon is now older at the point that he's writing this book. And let me just say, he was a wise man. He was, but he made a lot of mistakes. And he's going to share those mistakes. We sometimes gain wisdom after the mistakes of life. But I think there's a lot we can learn. And I will also say one more thought in closing today. while you'll see this phrase, vanity of vanities, or what does a man gain? If we're not careful, somebody could misread this book and think that he's telling us that things are hopeless, or we should be depressed, or nothing really matters, kind of nihilistic. That is not the case at all. It's the case that we should gain perspective, not hopelessness, but that we put our treasure, we put our thoughts, and we put our time and efforts on the things that really will matter in the long run. So I'm excited to begin this journey with you, to learn it with you, and I hope that these will be some great thoughts for you to begin contemplating as we now use this book of wisdom to help us with the issues of the world and the issues of our individual life.